Hello. Today I'm going to read you an extract from a story by my all-time favourite author, whose name is Terry Pratchett. Now he's quite a famous author who was best known for writing a series of books set on the Discworld, a flat world carried on the back of 4 giant elephants, which is carried on the back of a giant space turtle travelling through space. And they're a series of fantasy novels that are a bit of a parody of life on Earth. Now, I've been reading Terry Pratchett since I was probably in about year 5 or year 6, and he's written some stories for younger readers as well. And the first one I read was called Truckers, and it's part of a trilogy of books, Truckers, Diggers and Wings. And it's about gnomes who go on a bit of an adventure. And I'm going to read you a little bit from the first chapter today. The sky rained dismal. It rained humdrum. It rained the kind of rain that is so much wetter than normal rain, the kind of rain that comes down in big drops and splats, the kind of rain that is merely an upright sea with slots in it. It rained a tattoo on the old hamburger boxes and chip papers in the wire basket that was giving Masklin a temporary hiding place. Look at him. Wet, cold, extremely worried, and 4 inches high. The waste bin was usually a good hunting ground, even in winter. There were often a few cold chips in their wrapping, sometimes even a chicken bone. Once or twice there'd been a rat too. It had been a really good day when there'd been a rat. It had kept them going for a week. The trouble was that you could get pretty fed up with rat by the 3rd day. By the 3rd mouthful, come to that. Masklin scanned the lorry park, and here it came, right on time, crashing through the puddles and pulling up with a hiss of brakes. He'd watched this lorry arrive every Tuesday and Thursday morning for the last 4 weeks. He timed the driver's stop carefully. They had exactly 3 minutes. To someone the size of a gnome, that's more than half an hour. Now, gnomes, because they're so small, they live at a faster speed than humans. So for them, a minute would seem like an hour. He scrambled down through the greasy paper, dropped out of the bottom of the bin, and ran for the bushes at the edge of the park, where Grimmer and the old folk were waiting. "It's here," he said. "Come on." They got to their feet, groaning and grumbling. He'd taken them through this dozens of times. He knew it wasn't any good shouting. They just got upset and confused, and then they'd grumble some more. They grumbled about old chips, even when Grimmer warmed them up. They moaned about rat. He'd seriously thought about leaving alone, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. They needed him. They needed someone to grumble at. But they were too slow. He felt like bursting into tears. He turned to Grimmer instead. "Come on," he said. "Give them a prod or something. They'll never get moving." She patted his hand. "They're frightened," she said. "You go on. I'll bring them out." There wasn't time to argue. Masklin ran back across the soaking mud of the park, unslinging the rope and grapnel. It had taken him a week to make the hook out of a bit of wire teased off a fence, and he'd spent days practicing. He was already swinging it around his head as he reached the lorry's wheel. The hook caught the tarpaulin high above him at the second try. He tested it once or twice, and then, his feet scrabbling for a grip on the tyre, pulled himself up. My chair kept going down there. He'd done it before. We'd done it 3 or 4 times. He scrambled under the heavy tarpaulin and into the darkness beyond, pulling out more line and tying it as thickly as possible around one of the ropes that were thick as his arm. Then he slid back to the edge, and thank goodness, Grimmer was herding the old people across the gravel. He could hear them complaining about the puddles. Masklin jumped up and down with impatience. It seemed to take hours. He explained it to them millions of times, but people hadn't been pulled up onto the backs of lorries when they were children, and they didn't say why they should start now. Old Granny Morky insisted that all the men look the other way so they wouldn't see up their skirts, for example, and old Torrit whimpered so much that Masklin had to lower him again so that Grimmer could blindfold him. It wasn't so bad after he'd hauled the first few up, because they were able to help on the rope, but time still stretched out. He pulled Grimmer up last. She was light. They were all light, if it came to that. He didn't get rat every day. It was amazing. They were all on board. He'd worked with an ear cocked for the sound of footsteps on gravel and the slamming of the driver's door, and it hadn't happened. "Right," he said, shaking with effort. "That's it. Then, now, if we just go." "I dropped the thing," said old Thurit. The thing, I dropped it, you see. I dropped it down by the wheel when she was blindfolding me. You go and get it, boy. Masklin looked at him in horror. Then he poked his head out from under the tarpaulin, and yes, there it was, far below. A tiny black cube on the ground. The thing. It was lying in a puddle, though that wouldn't affect it. Nothing touched the thing. It wouldn't even burn. And then he heard the sound of slow footsteps on the gravel. There's no time, he whispered. There really is no time. We can't go without it, said Grimmer. Of course we can. It's just a thing. We won't need the wretched object where we're going. He felt guilty as soon as he'd said it, amazed at his own lips for uttering such words. Grimmer looked horrified. Granny Morky drew herself up to her full, quivering height. May you be forgiven, she barked. What a terrible thing to say. You tell him, Torrit, and she nudged Torrit in the ribs. If we ain't taking the thing, I ain't going, said Torrit sulkily. It's not... That's your leader talking to you, interrupted Granny Morky, so you do what you're told. Leave it behind, indeed. It wouldn't be decent. It wouldn't be right. So you go and get it this minute. Masklin stared wordlessly down at the soaking mud, and then, with a desperate motion, threw the line over the edge and slid down it. It was raining harder now, with a touch of sleet. The wind whipped at him as he dropped past the great arc of the wheel and landed heavily in the puddle. He reached out and scooped up the thing, and the lorry started to move. First there was a roar, so loud that it went beyond sound and became a solid wall of noise. Then there was a blast of stinking air and a vibration that shook the ground. He pulled sharply on the line and yelled at them to pull him up, and realised that even he couldn't hear his own voice. But Grimmer or someone must have got the idea, because just as the big wheel began to turn, the rope tightened and he felt his feet lifted off the mud. He bounced and spun back and forth as, with painful slowness, they pulled him past the wheel. It turned only a few inches away from him, a black, chilly blur, and all the time the hammering sound battered at his head. I'm not scared, he told himself. This is much worse than anything I've ever faced, and it's not frightening. It's too terrible to be frightening. He felt as though he was in a tiny warm cocoon, away from all the noise and the wind. I'm going to die, he thought, just because of this thing, which has never helped us at all, something that's just a lump of stuff, and now I'm going to die and go to the heavens. I wonder if old Torrit is right about what happens when you die. Seems a bit severe to have to die to find out. I've looked up at the sky every night for years, and I've never seen any gnomes up there. Oh, but it didn't really matter. It was all outside him. It wasn't real. Hands reached down and caught him under the arms and dragged him into the booming space under the tarpaulin, and with some difficulty prized the thing out of his grip. Behind the speeding lorry, fresh curtains of grey rain dragged across the empty fields, and across the whole country there were no more gnomes. Now, Terry Pratchett's known for being quite a funny author about making you laugh, but he was also setting up a story here about gnomes forced to leave their home and go travelling to find somewhere else to live. So I hope you enjoyed that, and definitely check out a little bit of Terry Pratchett if you get the chance.